The first time I can remember being moved by music was when I was a little boy, and Arthur Brown's Fire came on television, and his head was on fire because it was his Top of the Pops appearance. This song was called Fire, and I remember it. I remember started crying. Actually, maybe that's not a good example because I was just frightened. Let's start again. One of the first times I can remember being really excited about music was hearing Sweet Blockbuster on Crackerjack. And I didn't realise, Sweet were kind of like a glam rock band, and it was kind of the poppy end of glam rock. And then it was a few years later than that, I suppose not that many years, like 2 or 3 years later, I heard Heatwave Boogie Nights on Swap Shop. And I guess that was how, back in that era, you heard a lot of music from TV and on kids' television programmes and on Top of the Pops. I guess I liked a lot, I just liked pop music. I mean, you liked what was in the charts, and I didn't like a lot of what was in the charts, but it was a great era, 1977, 1978, 1979, for obviously for disco music, but also for punk and sort of generally for pop. I think one of the first times I heard a house type record was a track by Chocolate called The East Street Beat. That isn't really a house record, but it's kind of like a fast New York 4/4 record. And I thought that is a little bit different because it's quite fast and quite electronic sounding, but it's still got very much a sort of soul, funk, disco musicality to it. I just moved to London and I got a job in a record shop, and just as I was sort of starting to buy imports, the first wave of house was properly coming over. So though some of these records have been around for a while, things like House Music Anthem, Jack Your Body, and there was that happening as well as a lot of very strong hip hop like Eric B and Big Daddy Kane. And so there was these two scenes which both were putting out very different, especially tempo wise, but very creative music. I was as much into hip hop then as I was into house. And I suppose a lot of nights you went to then, it was a different scene because not many DJs could mix. So you would hear house, hip hop, sort of soul to soul type stuff, as well as maybe the more standard soul funk disco like Cameo or Timex Social Club, all mixed up within an hour. It was via this guy I bought a record off that I got a job in a record shop in London. And I worked in this record shop for 9 months, and then I managed to get a job in rough trade distribution where I worked there for 1.5 years. After a while, I managed to convince them to give me my own label, which was called Republic, and then I sort of did a bit of licensing. So I licensed in things like Phase 2 Reaching and Turntable Orchestra, You're Gonna Miss Me. And during that time when I was at rough trade, I'd also been spending my weekends in the studio. So I had an idea about arrangement and programming drum machines, things like that, but I didn't really know how to make a finished record. Back in that era where we made MDM Get Busy, it was an era where there was a lot of different influences coming together, and we did a house mix of it and a rare groove mix, and then we did a more acid house version. A lot of the records I make, I'm making them for myself. I'm not really making them to be successful. When I first did American Dream, I thought this has got something about it, but the first version I did didn't have the Indian singing on it. It was just kind of the sample and some drums, and it had the spoken word. I thought it had potential to be a hit. I was managed by Junior Boy's Own at the time, and Paul Byrne had Pete Tong's ear, and I sent it to Paul, and Paul said, "Oh, I prefer the version you did without the vocals." I said, "Well, can you send it to Pete anyway?" And he sent it to him, and Pete loved it, and he played it, made a big fuss about it, and that sort of launch pad can really help a record, especially if it's got something like the Thomas Newman music, and everybody loved the film American Beauty. So it's not just about the music, I think it's the association with a fantastic movie. I've never really been a fashion-led DJ. I've always just liked records, and if I like something, if it's instrumental or vocal, or if it's like by somebody who's sort of like not supposed to be cool, or if it's by somebody who's super cool, it's just like, do you actually like it? Does it please your ears when you hear it? You know, I'm a house master, bloody hell. You know what? It's nice to be acknowledged for what you've done. You know, I mean, there's been obviously the Housemaster series is like who's who of house music. So it's nice to be in that, you know, part of that. You know, those albums, and you know, to be there alongside Dennis Ferrer and Masters at Work and whatever. It's, you know, it's great. You know, so I guess I just chose some of the ones which are my favourites and the ones which I still like listening to myself now. And I tried to keep it a sort of across a bit of the slightly more deeper stuff, some of the more disco-y end of what I do.
Did you enjoy it?
Right, now we're getting into different. Turn the camera off.